One DnD is the next evolution of D&D, and it comes after 5th edition, so it has some big shoes to fill. The first playtest came out a few days ago and it introduced some very drastic changes, like removing crits for monsters in D&D. If you were to believe the community, even suggesting such a change is a bold move. Critical hits in D&D have been a part of the game since decades ago, and changing them now has a very emotional response in a lot of us. So let's try to push this emotion as far aside as we can for just a moment and try to see the pros and the cons of removing the critical hit. There's absolutely no way we can talk about critical hits without talking about the fundamental concept of luck in games. So let's do that first. Luck in games is very much hated with a passion in the gaming community, and for good reason. It sucks to get hit by something that you would seem to be unfair or that had a very low probability to happen, and still, even though you made the correct decision or the most optimal decision, being denied the favorable outcome, and dying by a critical hit can feel cheap and unearned. So why do almost all games involve some kind of luck? The reason for so much luck in our games are not that the developers are hating us, it's actually us, we as consumers and we as people. Humans are not built to always optimize, to have the most amount of fun in any given situation. We want to be successful and to achieve something, which was important in the early days of humankind, where it's not about the fun we have, it's about surviving, and being successful is way more important than having fun building your shelter. As such, we are hardwired pretty much to optimize the fun out of our games, if we get the chance to do so. So if we know exactly how much damage a monster will do, we will instinctively calculate how many turns we can survive without any threat of danger. And we don't get any tension because we know we are safe. This is why we can have less fun with not random games than we have with random games. In D&D, we don't want our stories to be written in stone. We don't want them to be able to be calculated. We want to have tension across the board. We want anything to be able to happen at any point in time. And luck plays a kind of barrier around the box that can be calculated. You can always only calculate so much in advance before luck becomes the dominant factor. And this is a good thing in a story game. But luck doesn't just improve the story aspect of the game. It also increases the fun in the competitive aspect, like the battles. For example, in a lot of competitive games, there is still a small factor of luck, like stun chances or crits or even a damage roll. And people who follow this kind of game scenes know the better players almost always win. It doesn't matter, almost doesn't matter that there's luck involved. But for the players and the spectators, it does. Every decision is not set in stone just by the decision. There's always left some tension. And luck also makes it so you have to adjust your strategies while you're following them, because there can always happen something that is unlikely and you may need to have a backup plan. And this gets complex really fast, which sets apart great players from good players. Let's go back to Dungeons and Dragons. I remember the situations where something really bad happened and we still made it out the most. Like when someone, like our healer, received a devastating crit and was downed. We couldn't rely on our regular strategy anymore. We had to make another one. We had to think outside of the box. We had to burn the tree and throw it on the enemies, because even though the whole forest began to catch fire, it was our only saving grace. At least that's what we thought. Problem is, this is a fine line. You can only have so much luck in your game before it just becomes a game of dice rolls and who rolls highest wins. This is not what we want. We want informed decisions with a sprinkle of luck, and fine-tuning this is really hard, which again is why it's very important to ask these questions. If critical hits are the best way to create the kind of situations that we want for our games. So how much luck is too much luck? Here we have to think about another one of these quirks we humans have. We overweigh the bad experience compared to the good ones, and we remember the bad experience also a lot worse than all the good experience we had. So the suggested change is to, instead of critical hits, give the monsters recharge abilities. What does that make of these monsters? They now have a powerful button they can press at pretty much any time for the DM to create epic moments, which is pretty nice. There's still a bit of luck involved because the monster has to recharge their abilities with a die roll. What this also does is force the developers to give monsters more signature-like abilities and give them a more unique standing. The goblin isn't just a weaker orc anymore. They can have an ability that gathers their troops, and the orc can have a wild, boring rush ability. This is good. The problems are, you now have to give all of your monsters these abilities, or all the benefits we listed before are basically lost. It's now also the DM that chooses to use this powerful ability against one or more of the allies, which can be a good or a bad thing depending on who you ask. It also makes the battlefield a bit less random because the DM now chooses this power button and it can't just happen anywhere over the field. The monsters will make a conscious decision now, but the players won't. There's a disconnect between the monsters and the players, which also doesn't necessarily need to be a good thing, because, for example, I think that players should face way less conditions that end turns or leave them stunned than monsters do, because players hold more agency than monsters do, and the DM almost always has a big group of monsters and the players just have themselves as a character. It also creates a situation where players want to know the monsters more before they face them, to know their special abilities, so they can play around them. They can wait for their special abilities to trigger and then counteract the strategies in a sense of security, because they may not get the ability back next round. But here is the big thing. I've talked a lot about the benefits of critical hits versus monster abilities. I don't think they should be exclusive. Why not have more interesting monsters with abilities, but also have the pretty low chance of a crit happening at a point in time? Also, the crit rules got changed. Now the bonus damage is only one roll of their weapon's damage dice. So if their weapon has more, then obviously it's more, but that will counter the argument a lot of people make against bugbears, one-hitting characters with their surprise damage. The surprise damage, or the paladin smite, or the rogue sneak attack is not doubled anymore. That's in the playtest as well. The last point is that removing critical hits for monsters makes low-level characters less likely to die and makes the combats less swingy. And this is true. The question to ask here is, do we need to remove this mechanic just to make one level of D&D feel safer? I think a better solution would be to rework the death saving mechanic, so it doesn't just knock people unconscious or knocks them out of the game entirely just because they are low level. The question we have to answer is, do we want to disregard the positive effects on the game just to remove the negative effect. This is more a philosophical question about the game design of the game that you want to play and we want to play, than it basically is about what is better. So for a conclusion, I think everything can work here. And I don't think that we have to get as emotional as we tend to get when something like this is considered. I mean, more monster abilities would be really, really cool. The question we have now answered is that a bit of luck in our games is good, and the sense of threat and the sense of having to make interesting decisions before moving into combat and even while in combat should stay. However that may be the case, we will see in the future.